HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Murder at Keyhaven Castle by Clara Mckenna, read by Sarah Zimmerman. Chapter 1. September 1905, Hampshire, England. Unable to bear the stench of bananas, horse dung, smoke, and salty air, Jesse James Prescott pulled the red bandana up over his nose. He stretched his shoulder blades, sore from leaning so long against the clapboards, and shot a glare up at the bunches of yellow fruit dangling above his head. Nasty things. Made him choke the one time he tried one. What had he been thinking, suggesting Snooks as the rendezvous point? Sure, in the chaos and bustle of the ship's arrival, the fruit merchant nearest the wharf, with its flashy displays of exotic produce enveloping the entire storefront, was an eye-catching landmark no one could mistake. But the god-awful smell. Jesse raised the flap of the bandana and spit into the street. Wagons rumbled by, and Jesse barely missed the polished hoof of a nice-looking sorrel Belgian draft. He'd seen some fine horses since he'd been here, enough to make him think about staying. But that would complicate everything. Best stick to the plan. Jesse stretched his back again as a wagon driver spurred his team safely across the path of a passing tram, only to collide into a stack of weathered rum barrels. Jesse snorted in laughter. "Excuse me, son, got a light?" Jesse's head whipped around, his hand reaching for a .38 tucked into his coat's inside pocket. The fellow was a few feet away, on the curb. Jesse never saw him coming. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you," the bearded stranger said in an accent that made Jesse homesick. With a crooked grin, the middle-aged man raised his 5-cent cigar. "Just needin' a light." Jesse eased his hand away from the hidden revolver, chuckling nervously. How could he have been so stupid he could have given himself away? "Sure, I got me some matches hereabouts." He patted his pants pocket and retrieved the matchbox with a lion on it he'd picked up somewhere. As he handed it over, he noticed a boy of about 10, with dirty blonde hair partly crossing one eye, tug the hand of a freckle-faced girl half his age through the crowd. The girl, her wide eyes darting from stacks of cargo and luggage to her fellow passengers scattered along the wharf, stumbled along behind. The fellow lit his cigar and took a couple of quick puffs, letting the smoke stream out from between his lips. "Thank you, cowboy." The fellow's broad smile revealed a small chip in his front tooth. He dropped the canvas knapsack he had flung over his shoulder and handed Jesse back the matchbox. Jesse, who usually didn't mind being compared to his namesake, suddenly felt foolish and self-consciously yanked the bandana off his face. "It's the bananas, you know, the god-awful smell." Jesse pointed above their heads. "Never seen so many in one place, that's for sure," the fella commented before shouting and waving to the children above the heads of passers-by. "Over here." "You from the States?" Jesse asked. "Kentucky, we just arrived. These here are my children." The children huddled around him. The man put his arm around the little girl, inspecting a smear on the worn, frilly yoke of the girl's dress, and then ruffled the boy's uncovered head. "Lost your cap again, Sammy?" The boy glanced at his feet and muttered something. Jesse, embarrassed for the boy, whose tousled, unevenly cut hair probably hadn't been covered for days, scoured the sea of hats for the man he was waiting for. "You sound like a Kentucky man, too, am I right?" "I might have said so once," Jesse muttered, scratching an itch on the back of his neck. He wished these folks would move on. Feeling cornered, he stepped away from the wall. Now, Jesse cringed when the fella slapped him friendly-like on the sore muscle in his shoulder. "Once a Kentuckian, always a Kentuckian, I say." Jesse didn't agree, but said nothing. It wasn't that he couldn't give this fella a piece of his mind on the subject, but any argument on his part would only invite the stranger and his kids to stick around, and he needed to get rid of them, and fast. "Fixin' to catch a train?" Jesse said.
Sure are, but seeing you're not from these parts, you probably can't tell me which one takes us closest to Morrington Hall, can you?
Morrington Hall. A flash of anger exploded through Jessie's chest.
I sure in hell can.
Jessie spit out the words and instinctively reached for his gun again. The stranger squinted sideways at him, smoothing down his long mustache. Before the fella started asking questions, Jessie added,
"Trains are over there,"
and pointed at the street toward the train depot.
"You'll be wanting the Rosehurst station. The big mansion is just outside town." "You know it? What luck,"
the fella said, squeezing his arm around his little girl.
"I know it all right,"
Jessie muttered, his anger seething beneath the surface. Why'd the fella have to mention Morrington Hall? Couldn't he have just lit his cigar and moved on? Why'd the boss have to make me wait so long? The usual alarms rang in Jessie's head, warning him he was about to do something stupid, and as usual, he ignored them.
"Who knows? Might be seeing you there myself."
"You going to Stella's big wedding, too?" the boy asked.
"No, boy, I don't care nothing about that wedding. I've got me a score to settle."
It slipped out before Jessie grasped what he'd said. Damn it all to tarnation, why'd he have to go and say that for? Jessie stared at the fella's face, gauging his reaction, his hand drifting slowly toward his hidden revolver. The fella lifted an eyebrow, the straggly graying brown hairs on the ends curling around, almost poking the man in the eye. But instead of saying or doing something they'd both regret, the fella held out his hand.
"Well, thank you kindly,"
he said. Jessie, relieved to be rid of him, shook it. The fella snatched his knapsack up from the ground and touched the brim of his hat. When he moved off, he shooed his children ahead of him. They dashed away. Jessie watched the fella go. What else could he do? Shoot the fella right there? Now that would be really stupid. He seemed like a smart fella. Maybe he'd keep his mouth shut. But would it make a difference if he didn't? No, sir. Jessie hadn't crossed an ocean just to get cold feet. Brushing aside the encounter, Jessie reached over into the nearest fruit bin and, with the grocer's back turn, plucked out a crisp green apple. Propping himself against the wall with his foot, he crunched into the apple.
"Now this here's a real fruit."
Jessie wiped the juice from his chin with the bandana around his neck and turned his attention back to the steady stream of passengers spilling down the pier, hoping he didn't have to wait much longer. 3 more days. Perched on a tapestry-covered footstool in the middle of the drawing room, Stella Kendrick could hardly believe it. She twisted one way and then another, examining herself in the freestanding full-length mirror. Miss Knaplock sighed in frustration, attempting to pin the hem. The loose topknot on the seamstress's head bobbed as she worked. "If you would stay still for one moment, miss." But Stella couldn't help herself. Caught in the bright morning sun streaming through the French windows, the bursts of orange blossoms of pearl embellishing the bodice and train of her dress shimmered when she moved. The sweeping gown of white silk muslin overlaid with cascades of silky, delicate Chantilly lace caressed her figure like a glove. It was the most beautiful dress Stella had ever seen. What a stark contrast to the man who had spared no expense in acquiring it for her. It wasn't that Stella wasn't grateful. She was, despite his lack of affection, his finding fault with all she did, his occasional burst of temper. Truly, he'd given her everything. This dress, a lovely home, a beloved horse, a vast fortune, and a secure future. He was her father, after all. She owed him her very existence. Yet as her wedding day approached, and with it a promise of a new start, Stella was counting the days her father went back to Kentucky. Was it possible to love someone and still wish they would go away? As if in answer, the door flew open, and the strong scent of his aftershave preceded Stella's father before he stomped into the room.
"Why aren't you upstairs getting ready?"
Startled, Miss Knaplock shoved a pin through the hem, piercing Stella's ankle. Stella yelped at the sting and jerked her leg away. The seamstress, her cheeks red with embarrassment, muttered a horrified apology. With a dismissive wave, Stella reassured Miss Knaplock and encouraged her to go back to what she was doing.
"Come on, girl, don't want to be late,"
Daddy said. Stella still didn't know why she had to go with him. He could meet the boat without her, or bring Aunt Rachel instead.
"And what are you doing wearing that dress again? You might ruin it."
Stella instinctually glanced down. Miss Knaplock had raised the silk muslin underskirt, examining it for bloodstains from the pinprick. Had they damaged it? After a brief pause, the seamstress released the underskirt and returned her attention to the hem. Stella blew out her pent-up breath. "It's the final fitting," Stella explained, swishing her hips to show him the seamstress's handiwork. The light danced off every pearl. "When we're done, it will be perfect."
"For what it cost me, it darn well should have been perfect in the first place,"
he said, drifting toward the long, narrow oak table set up to receive wedding gifts. With his back turned to them, Miss Knaplock offered Stella a sympathetic frown. Conscious of the pins running down the length of her sleeves, Stella added an exaggerated eye-roll to her modified shrug to convey her meaning of, "See what I have to put up with?" But she couldn't stay exasperated for long. How could she, with such a gorgeous gown on? Besides, the gesture had made her chuckle. How often had Lady Atherley done the same, usually aimed at her? Too many to count. At least Stella could laugh about it. "What are you looking for, Daddy?" Stella asked, absorbed in watching the seamstress deftly pluck pin after pin from between her pinched lips and slip it into place.
"Tim said a new package had arrived,"
he said, picking up one box after another.
"I want to know what it was and who sent it."
He sorted through all the presents, some still in their boxes, others set out for display. Stella could barely find a hint of the white damask tablecloth beneath them. There were so many spread out across the table. Like the pearls on her dress, the silver trays and tea sets, the porcelain dishes, the crystal bowls, the necklaces and earrings of diamonds and jewels all sparkled like a dragon's treasure in the morning sunshine. And like a hoarding dragon, her father hovered over it. The arrival of a new package was a highlight of his day. Either the gift was one of extravagance, like a jewel-encrusted tiara, which gave him cause to brag, or it was one of inconsequence, which gave him the excuse to deride the gift-giver to whoever would listen. Stella had stopped listening weeks ago. She'd also stopped looking forward to their arrival. The well-meaning presents brought out the worst in her father. "Is this it?" He held up a long rectangular package that fit neatly in his hand.
"It's addressed to you."
That was unusual. Most were addressed in care of him. His face lit up.
"The return address is from a jeweler in London."
Without further hesitation, he ripped off the brown packing paper and lifted the lid. Miss Knaplock, pins still poking out between her lips, held the dress's hem absent-mindedly, her attention on Daddy and the package. What did the seamstress imagine was in the box? A string of pearls, an engraved silver cake knife, a diamond-encrusted pair of scissors. Stella had received one of each.
"No card inside,"
he grumbled, replacing the lid and chucking the gold-colored box onto the table. Its contents clattered when the box caught the edge and dropped upside down on the floor. "What did you do that for?" Stella asked.
"If you ever think to give such a good-for-nothing wedding gift," he advised the wide-eyed seamstress, "you should have the decency to own up to it."
He was annoyed. The anonymous sender had robbed him of the pleasure of poking fun at them.
Who sends such a worthless trinket anyway?
He didn't wait for an answer before adding,
"Like I said, we leave on the hour. Go get ready."
The door closed behind him before Stella tried to hop off the stool. She had one stocking foot on the swirl of lacy train puddling on the carpet when Miss Knaplock tugged at the hem. "Please, miss, I'm not finished. Would you mind getting the box, then?" The seamstress nodded, plucked the last two pins from her mouth, and tossed them into the shallow glass dish on the floor beside her. Crouching over, she picked the crushed box up off the floor. "What is it?" Stella asked. "Is it broken?" The woman lifted the bent, painted cardboard lid. Even before she held it out to Stella, a glitter of reflecting light hinted at its contents. Laying secured by 2 tiny pieces of wire against the green velvet cushion was a spoon. A souvenir spoon like the one Stella had collected her whole life, the collection gathering dust back home in Kentucky. She had one from every place she'd visited, and many from places she'd never seen. She had gold-plated ones, sterling silver ones, ones made from nickel, steel, and even wood. Some had portraits of famous people, like George Washington in the bowl. Others were carved into the shapes of plants or animals. She had several from 2 different World's Fairs, but by her bedside upstairs was the only spoon she had in her possession. The one she bought in a little shop near the Southampton port the day they arrived in England, the day she met Lyndy. Stella's breath caught when Miss Knaplock placed the box in her outreached hand. This spoon was one of the finest she'd ever held. Surely her father should have recognized its monetary worth, even if he had no appreciation for the thoughtfulness behind the gift. But then again, compared to a tiara, it was a modest present. To Stella, it was priceless. Its handle of 2 interwoven vines was topped by a carving of 2 connected hearts framing the likenesses of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, set on a bouquet of ribbons and flowers topped by a crown. Its meaning wasn't lost on Stella. Theirs was a great love story. The sender of this spoon wished the same for Stella and Lyndy. But who had sent it? Who knew of her fondness for souvenir spoons? Certainly no one in England. "Isn't it beautiful?" Stella said. Miss Knaplock nodded, kneeling back down to finish her work. "I hope it wasn't damaged." "Me too." Stella lifted the spoon, luckily without a scratch on it, and its attached cushion from the box, and found a piece of unadorned white stationery folded beneath it. The handwritten message inside read, "May this complete your collection. May you find love that completes you." A quiver shot through Stella's shoulders and back, and she involuntarily shook. The seamstress peered up from her work. "Are you all right, miss?" Stella nodded, cradling the spoon in her palm. The tender sentiment, such a rarity in Stella's life, brought a wistful smile to her lips. But there was no signature on the note. Like her father, though for different reasons, Stella felt robbed of the pleasure of knowing who gave her the spoon. But then why send it? Chapter 2. Viscount Lyndhurst, or Lyndy, led the others confidently down the long aisle of the stables. All was as it should be. Every brass finial reflected the morning sunshine. The mahogany stalls had been freshly stained. Not a stray piece of straw or clump of horse dung littered the recently scrubbed cobblestone floor. A half-dozen horses whinnied and snorted in greeting when he passed, and soon there would be more. "This is Tully," Lyndy said, stopping in front of the horse's box stall. The dappled grey mare approached the door and nudged Lyndy's hand with her muzzle, knowing what was hiding in his fist. She eagerly snapped off the end of the peppermint stick he held out to her. She was a sweet, magnificent creature, much like her owner. His thoughts straying to her owner, Lyndy scratched the white blaze on the animal's forehead. In 3 days, Stella would finally be his. 3 interminably long days. After offering the last of the peppermint stick to Tully, Lyndy reached into his pocket for more peppermint and moved on to Tupper's stall. The sleek chestnut filly wasn't as friendly as her neighbor and had to be coaxed to approach. But what was that to him? The horse could demand an orchard of apples or her weight in peppermint candy for all he cared. "Tupper, as you know, won the Princess of Wales Stakes this year," Lyndy said, patting her soundly on the neck, "and placed in the St. Leger Stakes last week." Such a welcome triumph for the family, though the filly technically belonged to Stella's father until after the wedding. The Sirowens hadn't had a champion since Grandpapa retired Augustine years ago. Lyndy hoped with Tupper they would do so again. Even Mother recognized the filly's potential. Had they owned Tupper already, their share of the purse would have allowed his mother to hire a proper second footman, giving Lyndy back his valet and a live-in gardener instead of relying on the unpredictable local man she had to suffer with. Lyndy already had plans to enter the filly in the trial stakes at Ascot next year.
Yes, these are all lovely, Lyndy, but where's the stallion?
Lyndy glanced over his shoulder at his companions. Sir Alfred Goodkin, his round-faced, bespectacled old chum from Eton, and Sir Owen Rowntree, Lyndy's younger but much taller cousin. They were but two of the cadre of his family's friends and relatives hovering about Morrington Hall in anticipation of the wedding. Some, like Owen, were guests up at the house, while others, like Alfred, lived close enough to pop around unannounced to join in the festivities. Lyndy had little use for most of the visitors, but these two, like him, were enthusiasts of the turf, and they were keen to see the champion thoroughbreds. It was Owen's impatient voice that drew Lyndy's attention. Owen, having arrived too late last night for a trip to the stables, had insisted Lyndy show him Orson, the Kendricks' world-famous champion stud, right after breakfast. Owen had no patience with fillies and mares. Alfred, fortuitously having dropped by for a chat, decided to tag along.
"He's over here."
Lyndy pointed across the aisle to the box, still marred by a nod and splintered wood casing. Gates, the stablemaster, still struggled to find an exercise regimen or daily routine that would keep the ornery stallion from chewing on the door. Owen stepped across the aisle and peered in.
"He must be black as pitch."
Owen shielded his eyes from the light streaming through the stable windows with his hands.
"It's too dark in there. All I see is his outline."
The horse peered out from the darkness. Without warning, the stallion poked his head through the door's opening, seized the brim of Owen's fedora between his teeth, and flung it. The hat sailed down the aisle before dropping through the open doorway of an empty stall. Orson, peeling back his lips as if in laughter, nibbled at the doorframe.
"Bloody hell!"
Owen touched the crown of his head where his hat once sat. Alfred burst out laughing. Lyndy rifled his younger cousin's hair, remarking on its similarity in color to Tupper's coat, before motioning for the stable boy to fetch Owen's hat.
"I say, that stallion better be first-rate, for he's as irascible as his reputation says."
Owen brushed the front of his tweed jacket. When the boy offered Owen back his fedora, Owen waved it away, laughing.
"Be a good lad and burn it."
Shimmering with horse saliva, it smelled foul. Lyndy had forgotten what a good sport Owen could be. Before he'd been sent off to Eton, Lyndy had relished the carefree weeks spent every summer at Hubberham Park, Owen's family estate in Yorkshire. Free of all restraints, the pair would venture out into the countryside, fencing with sticks atop stone walls, fishing ankle-deep in the clear, bracing streams, racing their ponies across the moors, and when inevitably Owen would trip on a raised root or stumble on a stone, allowing Lyndy to win a foot race, Owen would laugh it off and be ready to race again.
"Oh, he's first-rate, all right," Lyndy said, "perhaps the most valuable stud in the country."
"That's what I heard said about Chalacombe when he won at Doncaster," Owen said. Bam! The feisty stallion slammed his hoof against the door in a kick, sending all three men scuttling to a safe distance.
"I think he disagrees,"
Alfred chuckled as Leonard, the head groom, came running to calm the stallion down.
"As do I," Lyndy said.
"May I remind you, Orson won half of all his starts, still holds the American record for 7 furlongs, and has already produced a Derby winner."
"Hear, hear!"
Alfred cheered in appreciation.
"Besides, Baron Branson Hill isn't known for breeding his horses, now is he? Chalacombe might languish from too many oats before he ever covers a mare."
"Baron Branson Hill?" Owen asked when the men retreated toward the stable-yard. "Did Singer sell him Chalacombe?"
"Supposedly the Baron purchased the stallion yesterday, or the day before, not long."
"How did we not hear of this?" Lyndy asked. "What I can't fathom is why," Owen asked. "Singer seems too enamored with his winner to sell so quickly." Alfred shrugged.
I hadn't heard a hint of it either until this morning. Lady Atherley was discussing it with someone while I waited for you two."
His mother talking about a racehorse. Lyndy wished he'd witnessed such an extraordinary conversation. Clearly, staying out of Mother's way came with a downside. What could she possibly be up to now?
"Seems the Baron plans to bring Chalicoombe to Morrington tonight," Alfred was saying. Owen scrunched his nose. "From the island, whatever for? I'd be willing to hop the ferry to see that horse."
Alfred stopped to pet the stray pup that had turned up in the stable yard one day a few weeks ago. Brown, scruffy, and friendly. Gates had made the case it was a good watchdog. No one had dissuaded him from keeping the new mongrel after the events of last May. The stables required a canine sentinel. Secretly, Lyndy was delighted. Once Grandpapa's hounds had died, neither Mother nor Papa saw the need to keep a pet.
"Something about a dinner party," Alfred said, rubbing behind the dog's ears. "Mother's planned one for tonight to introduce Stella to Owen and a few others who've yet to have the pleasure," Lyndy said, encouraging Mac, as the dog had come to be called, to jump up and put his feet on Lyndy's chest. Lyndy had been eagerly anticipating dinner. He hadn't seen Stella in 2 days. To get to size up Chalicoombe up close was an unexpected treat. But why was the Baron bringing the champion stallion around? Mother couldn't have suggested it. Whom had she been talking to? Before he could ask, Leonard approached to receive his instructions. "I'll ride Beau," Lyndy told the groom when the dog shoved off his chest and bounded over to greet Leonard. "Sir Alfred will ride his horse, but I believe Sir Owen would like to take Tupper out." Owen nodded enthusiastically. "And he will need something for his head." When the groom strode off to prepare the horses, Mac dutifully following, Owen said, "Well, I certainly hope your filly treats me with more respect than your stallion did, old chap." Lyndy laughed. "I can assure you Tupper is much more amiable." Owen shook his head. "I wasn't talking about that filly. I was talking about this American you've foolishly gotten yourself attached to." Lyndy frowned. "If you're speaking of Miss Kendrick, I am indeed attached to her, and you would do well to remember that." "No need to be cross," Owen chuckled, noting he'd touched a nerve. "At least from what I've heard, she's easy on the eyes and comes with a much-needed infusion of cash." "Yes," Lyndy said, tight-lipped. He didn't appreciate Owen bringing the topic up. His family's financial difficulties were the reason Stella and he were marrying in the first place. It was only by providence Lyndy found in her his perfect mate. "There is that. Miss Kendrick is far more than an attractive heiress," Alfred said, unexpectedly coming to Stella's defense. "She's quite charming, nothing like Lady Philippa, not to mention an excellent horsewoman." Lyndy winced at Alfred's comparison to Philippa, having hoped never to hear that woman's name again, but sensed his friend's good-natured appreciation for his bride-to-be. And if he were trying to win Owen's good opinion, Lyndy couldn't have found better words. Owen couldn't resist admiring a good horsewoman. "Beautiful, yet nothing like Lady Philippa, and a good horsewoman," Owen teased. "Maybe I'll try to woo her away from you, old chap. If she's sensible, she'll prefer a good-natured Yorkshire squire than the dour viscount she's been shackled to. Is it true she's from the wilds of the American West?" "Kentucky, actually. It's not the lawless, wild place you imagine." Lyndy had pictured Stella's home as Owen did before he'd heard the Kendricks describe the manicured ranches, the elegant racetracks, the cultured high societies of Lexington and Louisville. He planned to attend the Kentucky Derby one day. "You won't find gunslingers or unruly cowboys there." "It doesn't mean she won't be a bit wild and unruly on her wedding night," Owen said, winking at Alfred. "Ahem." Alfred coughed nervously in surprise, which sent his spectacles sliding down the bridge of his nose. "Don't say you've never thought of it," Owen said. Alfred, still sputtering his denial, took his spectacles off, pulled a handkerchief from his breast pocket, and proceeded to wipe them clean. "I'm certain the bridegroom has," Owen said. "Eh, Lyndy?" Lyndy tugged on the lapels of his riding coat. What did Owen expect him to say? He'd be a fool to deny he hadn't imagined his wedding night. He'd caressed the silky strands of Stella's hair, felt the curves of her body against him, tasted the sweetness of her lips, shivered at her breath in his ear, hadn't he? But that was between him and...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?